Hello and welcome to DFS Coach Talk. It's Thursday, December 23rd, 2021. I am Andrew Hanson alongside Josh Crash Davis. And Josh, it's a little hard to keep track in the NFL right now, but I think it's Thursday. We've got week 16 on Sunday for the main slate. Is that right?
I think that's right. You know, we've got another game tonight, so it's just another day of the week right now. Two NFL games, and then one day off, and then another one, and then we got more on Saturday. So NFL all the time right now.
What a week. Yeah, we had the Thursday Night Football podcast recorded earlier in the week by Omaha Joe Stanton. So check that out this evening if you haven't already to get ready for the Thursday night battle. But Josh and I are going to get you ready for the main slate. We had a real fun night in hoops last night.
Mm-hmm.
Coach led the charge. He had a takedown on Yahoo, and we had some members with some huge wins. So congratulations to there. And we're going to try to keep it rolling here on the NFL side of things. And we're going to go position by position again for this main slate. Kind of some strange games this week for who's left on the main slate. We have 11 total games, 8 early kickoffs, 3 late kickoffs, no totals over 50, Josh. We do have 2 over 45, and we will be interested in those games. But we wanted to just zero in again on the positions, starting with the quarterbacks. So who's going to go first there? Josh, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so I'm looking at Matthew Stafford. He's 7,900 on FanDuel, 6,700 on DraftKings. He's going up against the Vikings. They've allowed the third most fantasy points to quarterbacks. You know, even though the Bears weren't able to score a lot of points on Monday, Justin Fields was still able to throw for almost 300 yards against them. And the week before that, Ben Roethlisberger threw for 308 with 3 touchdowns. And then Jared Goff threw for 296 and 3 scores. So Stafford has been playing well lately. He should be able to, put up some nice numbers, I think, against that Vikings secondary. And, looking at him as a top play, probably looking at him in cash this week for my top option.
Yeah, solid. I really like how he's been playing and consistent, which makes sense for cash. The last 4 weeks, 3, 3, 3, and 2 touchdown passes.
Mm-hmm.
So he makes some sense to me. The other pay-up guy I'm looking at is Justin Herbert, who's more expensive on DraftKings at 7,200. He's got Houston on the road. They're big favorites, 9.5, with a good total here, 45.5. But this is the game that's a little bit scary because what happens if they get a couple rushing touchdowns? How much are they going to have to throw it? And that's what I'm concerned about when you have a strong offense against a team that you don't have much faith that they're going to stay in it and put any pressure on the Chargers. And it's such a good matchup on the ground because Houston's dead last in rushing yards per game. But I also like Herbert's consistency. He's had 5 straight games with at least 24 DraftKings points. So that's the give and take there, but he's definitely on my radar.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. If that game can stay close, though, there's a lot of potential there, and I don't think that a lot of people will be playing him. So that makes a lot of sense for tournaments for sure.
All right, well, if we go a little cheaper, who are you looking at?
Just a little bit cheaper as Jalen Hurts, 7,700 on FanDuel, 6,400 on DraftKings, coming off a strong game against Washington on Tuesday. This week he's going up against the Giants, the last team he faced before he came back from his injury. And in that game, he struggled quite a bit. He had 3 interceptions and only 129 yards passing. But I think that he's going to bounce back in this game. And going up against the Giants team that's just about average against quarterbacks this year. But Pro Football Focus really likes him this week. They have him projected as their 3rd highest scoring quarterback on the main slate. So I think Jalen Hurts is in play for me.
Yeah, I like how he looked against Washington. He's definitely trending in the right direction. Next guy for me is Tyler Huntley at only 6,000 on DraftKings. Another mobile quarterback. He's had a rushing floor of 40 yards in his 3 starts. So I like that. We know his passing upside's been there too.
Yeah.
215 and 2 against Green Bay. 68.8 completion percentage for him this season. And this is going to be a key game. If we were going to go game by game this week, this one would have been in the mix with these teams at 8 and 6. AFC North battle. Decent total on this slate at 44.5. And then with Tyler Huntley, the other thing that we like is Cincinnati's been pretty good against the run. So he should have more success, or at least decent success, when he does pass it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like it. And for me, for my next play, I'm actually looking at the opposite side. I'm looking at Joe Burrow. He's 5,900 on DraftKings. He struggled quite a bit last week in Denver, but this should be a good spot for him to bounce back. Baltimore's allowed the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and their secondary has just been decimated with injuries. So Burrow had his best game of the year against the Ravens in their last matchup. He had 416 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and only 1 interception for 30.6 DraftKings points. And so right now, Burrow is going to be my favorite quarterback option in tournaments.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me as well. I think we'll get a bunch of ownership there on DraftKings because of those prices. One other guy I want to mention here before we transition to the running backs is Justin Fields. He's only 5,200 on DraftKings. I like how he's been coming along. He's got that strong rushing floor, averaging 35 yards per game on the ground. He doesn't have as good of a completion percentage. Pretty poor, actually, 58.9. But against Seattle, the team that's last in the league in passing yardage allowed, I think he can have a little bit of success passing the ball. And the last 2 weeks, he's had 17 and 21 DraftKings points. I think it just profiles well for him. It's a pretty good matchup with Seattle, and the fact that they're out of the playoff mix now and struggling to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was pretty impressed with Fields when we played against him, when the Packers played against him. He, like I said, he moved the ball up and down the field against the Vikings. He just couldn't put it in the end zone, but he's definitely starting to figure it out, I think.
Yep. All right, let's see if we can figure out some running backs. And I'll kick us off here with James Robinson, who's a real nice value on DraftKings this week at 5,900. Not so much on FanDuel, where he's 82, but on DraftKings, he stands out to me because he's got the Jets, and they are towards the bottom of the league in defense across the board, number 30 in yardage allowed to running backs. And Robinson now, he's had some issues this season, injuries, the coaching mess, but 4.7 yards per carry on the season. He was solid last week against Houston, 75 yards, got a touchdown, caught 3 balls in a loss. And we know the Jets are just really struggling here defensively, can give up big numbers to running backs. Duke Johnson last week was the recipient of that juicy matchup. So I like Robinson here. Pretty chalky, but at 5,900 is pretty hard to pass up in my eyes.
Yeah, I agree. And that price differential is pretty amazing, between FanDuel and DraftKings. 8,200 on FanDuel. I'm not sure I'm going to get there, but on DraftKings, I'm for sure going to be playing him. Yep. And yeah, the Jets have allowed the most fantasy points to running backs. So
get him in the end zone. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, who's your first pick here for running backs?
He wasn't on my radar at all until today. Dalvin Cook got placed on the COVID list, so it's going to be Alexander Mattison. He's only 5,500 on FanDuel, so once again, we have a pretty big price discrepancy between the two sites. 6,800 on DraftKings, but yeah, Cook was placed on the COVID list today, so Madison's going to be starting. He's been really good in his starts this year. He had 21.4 DraftKings points against the Lions in his last start, and then he had 30.3 against them in week 5 and 26.1 against Seattle in week 3. So the Rams have been about average against the run, but on FanDuel, it's a lock and load play for me at only 5,500, and obviously in play on DraftKings at 68.
Yeah, I'm really interested in Madison as well. And you mentioned those high fantasy point totals in his 3 starts. He only had 2 touchdowns in those games. So it was really all about the volume on the ground and all the volume he got in the passing game. He had 16 receptions in those 3 games.
Right.
So he just comes in as the workhorse, and I like him as well. Now, another guy I'm looking at who's a little cheaper on both sites, Ronald Jones, and he's got a real opportunity here with Fournette out. And it's kind of a lower scoring profile game here, a total of 44 with Carolina, but they are weaker against the run. They're number 19 there in yards allowed, really stingy against the pass. So I like his opportunity here for the Bucs to game plan, get him a bunch of touches. He looked good in relief last game against New Orleans, 8 carries for 63 yards, caught a couple balls. He's averaging 4.7 yards per carry on the season. So, he's just had an unfortunate year personally because he's gotten behind Fournette, and Fournette has really stepped up his performance this year. But now with that backfield basically to himself, I like his opportunity here.
Yeah, it seems like when I've been watching him that, he just really shows a nice burst and then he just goes and sits on the bench. So hopefully this will be a good opportunity for him.
Yes. All right, who's your second running back?
My second running back is going to be Miles Sanders. He's 5,600 on DraftKings. He's got back-to-back games with over 100 yards now. He had 18 carries for 131 yards Tuesday. And then the week before that, before the bye, they had 24 carries for 120 against the Jets. So the Eagles played the Giants in week 12. And in that game, Sanders only carried the ball 9 times, but he had 64 yards rushing on only 9 carries. So that's over 7 yards per carry. The Giants have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to running back. So I think that he's going to have a heavier workload this week, more like what we've seen the last 2 games from him, and have a really good chance to go over 100 yards for the 3rd straight game. Yeah,
I like Sanders for the reasons you mentioned. The one caveat with that offense, with Hurts and Sanders is the short week. So we'll see what the injury reports are like heading into Sunday and what intel we can get there. We are recording this on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah.
But definitely interested in that Philly offense in general. There's going to be one more key value running back, potentially Justin Jackson, that I will have locked in a bunch of my lineups if Eckler is out. So we'll see. But 4,200 for him on DraftKings is ultra cheap.
Yeah.
So we'll strategize here in the next couple of days and how we finalize things for the members in terms of how much exposure we get to each of these value running backs. All right, let's talk some wide receivers here. There's a pay-up option, Josh, that I think we both like, a guy who's been rather hot lately.
Yeah, hard to avoid Cooper Kupp right now, 9,100 on DraftKings. He's been the top wide receiver in fantasy this year, and he's going to have his best matchup on paper of the year against the Vikings. They've allowed the most fantasy points to wide receivers, and Pro Football Focus really likes this matchup. They give him the highest rating advantage against all defenders with a matchup advantage of 99.4. And also, as they do most weeks, project him to be the highest scoring wide receiver this week. But he's 4 points higher projected than any receiver on the slate. So definitely looking to pair him up with Stafford in many of my lineups.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, what a monster. He's had 4 games this season with over 37 DraftKings points. The guy just keeps crashing his head through the ceiling repeatedly. What a stud. One potential pay-up who's a little cheaper, Deontay Johnson, 7,500, going up against Kansas City, and they'll give up some yardage to wide receivers. They're 28th on the season in that department. Pittsburgh should be playing from behind as 8.5-point underdogs. Big Ben loves to throw it to Deontay. He had a bit of a down week last week, only 5 catches on 5 targets against Tennessee in that slugfest. But 5 straight games before that with between 10 and 14 targets. So I like Deontay here to bounce back and possibly be lower ownership because of the price and because of his down week last week.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that that's going to be a more favorable matchup for him than we saw against Tennessee. I think that especially, the Chiefs have been dealing with some injuries in their secondary and COVID issues. So we'll see if those guys are able to play or not. But if not, that should definitely open it up for Deontay.
Excellent. All right. How about some next options as we go down the pricing list?
Yeah. So for my next option, I'm going to be looking at Jamar Chase. He's 7,100 on both sites, actually. In tournaments, as I mentioned, I'm going to be, playing Joe Burrow. So I'm going to be looking to pair him up with Burrow. He had his best game of the year the last time he faced Baltimore. He had 8 receptions for 201 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. Last week in Denver, he was basically a non-factor. He only had 1 reception for 3 yards on 4 targets. So I think that Burrow is going to look to get him going again. I think this is going to be a big bounce back week for him against the decimated Baltimore secondary, like we talked about before. And on the other side, my one concern would be if Baltimore was going to defend him like they did with Devontae Adams with 2 and 3 guys all game. But they've got T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, so I don't think that that's going to happen. And Pro Football Focus has him as their 3rd highest projected scoring wide receiver on the main slate behind Kupp and Jefferson. So I think that this is going to be a big bounce back week for Jamar Chase.
Yeah, and I saw a report from the defensive coordinator indicating that they don't plan to treat either of those guys like they treated Devontae.
Yeah.
So that's a nice opportunity for Chase and for Higgins to get easier coverage.
Right.
All right. So my next guy, I want to mention a mid-tier option, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 5,600 on DraftKings. And Josh, this might be the first time I ever say I'd be a little nervous on this one if Jared Goff does not play because he's questionable. But he's developed some nice chemistry with St. Brown.
Yeah.
And this is a nice matchup here against Atlanta. 79% of the routes here in the slot for St. Brown. That's the projection from PFF. And the 13th best matchup rating on the board, which isn't bad for a guy at that price tag.
Right.
And we've seen some really strong performances in this matchup in the last, second half of the season here. Remember, CeeDee Lamb had 94 yards and 2 scores against Atlanta, and then Godwin just destroyed them for 15 catches and 143.
Yeah.
So I could see Goff, continuing that rhythm of peppering St. Brown with targets.
Yeah. I didn't really know much about St. Brown, until I started looking at his numbers, and I was like, man, he's been in the top lineups lately. The winning lineups, he's been in almost every one of them. And I just knew that he was Equanimeous St. Brown's brother. That's about all I knew.
Yeah, he's really stepped up here recently. So he won't be ignored for much longer.
Definitely not.
All right. Next option here, a guy that's going to be pretty highly owned, I think.
Yeah, Antonio Brown's finally coming back. He's only 4,900 on DraftKings. And with the injuries to Chris Godwin, obviously out for the year, unfortunately, and then Mike Evans is dealing with his injury. It's kind of an absurd price for a guy that's going to probably be Tom Brady's top option on Sunday. The Panthers have allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, so it's not the easiest matchup. But at 4,900, I don't really care. The target's going to be there, and it's Tom Brady throwing to him. So, I think it's a lock and load.
I think it is an absurd price. He's averaged 20.3 DraftKings points per game. So at under 5,000, you're looking at over 4x return on average.
Yeah.
And, he hasn't had a game without Godwin and Evans.
Right.
So I don't care about anything else either. The matchup, the ownership. I think you got to put him out there. We will have some other value options, even cheaper than Brown, for our members. So we'll work on those depending on who's in and who's out. Just a couple moving parts to keep track of. But if you want to grab our lineups, our full DraftKings coaches clipboard, and then the cash and GPP lineups on FanDuel, same thing on Yahoo, full lineups, then jump in with us at dfscoachtalk.com. Grab your membership there. We will invite you into our Discord with an email and give you those lineups on Sunday. We'll also cover all the showdown slates, of course, in between and after. So we have a lot of fun with that. dfscoachtalk.com is the website. Any questions, you can find us on Twitter at dfscoachtalk. All right, Josh, let's hit up some tight ends. And I'll kick us off there on the high end with Mark Andrews, who has been on a roll here, kind of like Kittle. These guys are really battling to get that top tier look as we trend towards the end of the season. As we mentioned, a really important matchup here. And Huntley's been, really targeting Andrews in a big way. Yeah. Over 10 catches, at least 10 catches the last 2 weeks, over 100 yards. He's gotten in the end zone 3 times. And it's a top 10 matchup against tight ends here with Cincinnati. So he's expensive at 7,000. but he is one of the few tight ends that I'm looking at this week.
Yeah, I completely agree. He's the top tight end in fantasy this year. I don't know how many people knew that, but he sure is. And, he's really shown a chemistry with Huntley. He's got 2 of his top 3 games this year with Huntley at quarterback. So definitely in play.
All right. Give us another option here for tight ends.
Another option, just paying down to the mid-level, would be Dallas Goddard. He's 5,900 on FanDuel, 5,100 on DraftKings. He's had, strong back-to-back performances with 7 catches for 135 yards on 9 targets against Washington. And then he had 6 catches for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns on 6 targets against the Jets. So he's really been performing at a high level. You could pair him up with Jalen Hurts and go from there.
Okay. I like it. I'm going to go a lot cheaper here for one more consideration. That's Cole Kmet. He's 3,300 on DraftKings. And he's got the number 6 matchup for tight ends against Seattle. Again, they're 6.5-point underdogs. So we should see some Fields to Kmet action. And he had 9 targets last week against Minnesota. I like that. 6 catches for 71. The one hesitation here, and part of the reason he's priced where he is Jimmy Graham's out there a bunch. He had 2 targets last week. And then, of course, it was Jesper Horsted who caught the touchdown on the last play of the game, 19-yarder. So, Kmet is the lead guy. He's, very likely to get the most targets. But it's not one of those situations where he's just the guy. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of the other tight ends sneaks in there for a touchdown. But at 3,300, I think he's worth a look.
Yeah, that's a good price. I mean, that's not a starting tight end price right there at 3,300 for sure.
Yep.
So.
All right. Do you have one more?
Yeah, I've got Zach Gentry. He's 2,800 on DraftKings. Pat Freiermuth missed practice once again today. So if he's going to be out, Gentry becomes a top value option. The Chiefs allowed the 11th most fantasy points to tight ends. Eric Ebron's on IR, so he would be the default starting tight end for them. So too cheap to not consider if he ends up being the starter.
Yes, indeed. All right, let's hit some defenses here to finalize these rosters and try to have a big Sunday. So why don't you lead us off there?
Yeah, so at 2,900 on DraftKings, the Patriots are 2,900. I don't understand that at all. They've been one of the top defenses, if not the best defense in the NFL this year. And they're going to be at home against the Buffalo team that they just held to 10 points a few weeks ago. And I know the weather had a big part to do with that, but still, I mean, the Patriots are the Patriots and they have a really good defense. So don't really understand that price.
Yeah, I agree. That one jumped out at me, kind of like the Bills last week.
Yeah.
Jumped out for both of us at 3,100. But yeah, 2,900 doesn't really match their profile. So they're in my pool. I'm also looking at the high end here with Tampa at 4,100. They've got Carolina. Mentioned the total of 44, but they're the huge favorites at minus 11. So very low implied total for Carolina. Cam Newton at the helm. He's had 5 turnovers in his last 3 games. And we've got DJ Moore questionable at this point on Thursday. That's a key weapon. And Tampa going to be fired up. That defense, they only gave up 9 points last week, but they lost to the Saints.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to try to run it back, have a strong game, and make sure Tampa gets back in the win column.
Yeah, no, that they're definitely in play, and this might come as a surprise to some people, but I'm actually looking at Carolina too. I think this game could be lower scoring than people think. They're bottom priced 2,300 on DraftKings, and I think second or third, least expensive, on FanDuel. So they're right there at the bottom on the pricing. It's a scary suggestion on paper, but when you consider that the Bucs will be without their top 2 wide receivers possibly, and starting running back against the Panthers defense, it's been pretty solid, especially at home. Carolina's allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 4th fewest to running backs, and the 6th fewest to wide receivers. So they're up there in the top in all those categories, and I just think that it's too cheap for a punt play this week.
Yeah, that's one of the potential extreme punt plays that I think could work out. The other one that's kind of scary for me that I want to mention is the Raiders at 2,900.
Mm-hmm.
They've got Denver. Nice low total here, 41.5. And Drew Lock is going to be under center on the other side. He's got some turnover issues.
Yeah.
This season, he's had 40 pass attempts, 2 interceptions, and a fumble. So he just hasn't been out there for very many plays. He's already turned it over 3 times. Completion percentage only 55%. The Raiders coming off a pretty solid performance against Cleveland, where they only gave up 14 points.
Right.
Yeah, they were dealing with COVID, but they had Chubb that they had to try to contain.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yes, the week before, KC ran all over the Raiders. That's why it's a little bit scary. But that's another pivot if you want to go off of the Patriots at that price and go with a much less established defense. Then that's an option for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking at the Raiders too, and for the reasons that you mentioned. So I think it's a good option to pivot.
All right, great. Well, that covers the main slate. Again, jump in with us for lineups at dfscoachtalk.com. Josh, any final thoughts here on the main slate and this holiday weekend?
Yeah, I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and enjoy your family and your friends this weekend. Enjoy watching all the football games. There's going to be plenty to keep you entertained, and we'll hopefully crush this weekend.
Agree completely. So, well said. And on behalf of Josh Crash Davis and the rest of the DFS Coach Talk team, I'm Andrew Hanson. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time as we look to crush it in DFS.